There was an op-ed piece in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago which asked the question, how much weight should voters give to candidates' personalities? It was in response, at least in part, to Donald Trump's wildly flamboyant style as the front-running Republican in the race for a presidential nomination. Several psychologists, including the co-authors of the op-ed, conducted a study of the 42 United States presidents up to and including George W. Bush. They compiled data gathered by experts on each president and then used models from the research literature on personality to estimate each president's narcissism level. Then, and this is where it gets interesting, they correlated those estimates with ratings of presidential performance as judged by a panel of historians. What they found might surprise you. Narcissism, and in particular, grandiose narcissism, was positively correlated with overall presidential success. The two presidents who scored the highest were, by the way, Lyndon Johnson and Theodore Roosevelt. They and others who had high indicators did better in crisis management, public persuasiveness, and agenda setting. And, as is the case with narcissistic individuals in general, they tended to make a positive first impression, perform well in public, and be willing to take risks. Necessary qualities if your goal is to win an election. The study suggested other not so positive outcomes as well, the tendency to be overconfident in decision making, for example, or even to engage in unethical behaviors. The name of the article, in case you want to look it up, is The Narcissist in Chief. I found this piece intriguing because it raises some very vexing questions. I wonder, for instance, what the Trump phenomenon, of which he is only the flashiest expression, what does that say about our fascination with celebrity and the ability of we, the people, to distinguish between superficial charm and genuine character? And I wonder what faith has to do with any of it. Are we Christians on Sundays and back to the real world on Monday? In the gospel lesson for today, Jesus tells his disciples for the second time what is going to happen to him. The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. The disciples respond in a way that is familiar by now. They don't have a clue. Mark puts it this way, but they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. What the text doesn't tell us is why the disciples were afraid. Maybe they're still smarting from that awful scene in chapter 8. As you remember, when Jesus predicted his death in last week's lesson, Peter raises a ruckus, which in turn prompted Jesus to respond with words so harsh we can hardly believe he said them. "Get behind me, Satan," he says, and I'm guessing he said it with great energy in his voice. I'd be scared too. Or maybe they hope their teacher will be fooled into thinking that they do understand We've all been there, haven't we? Just lay low, keep your mouth shut, and hope you don't get called on. But the disciples give themselves away because instead of admitting they are confused, they start arguing about who is the greatest. It sounds ridiculously inappropriate, and yet, how better to deflect words they don't want to hear? I wonder, frankly, if they did get it, but the reality Jesus was presenting was just too horrifying for them to take it in. And so they did what we often do when we are overwhelmed, which is simply to shut down, changing the subject or picking a fight, avoidance strategies that work. Now, in a way, their blustery posturing, vying for position, scrambling to be better than someone else is as predictable as sunrise after sunset. It's the way things are, a hallmark, if you will, of the human condition. Today, 2,000 years later, who among us doesn't participate in the game of who's the greatest? Who doesn't want our team, our school, our city, our whatever to be number one? Who doesn't like to somehow distinguish themselves from the pack? It's easy to understand why. In our culture, and in fact, all cultures that I know anything about, those who make it to the top of the heap are richly rewarded, while those at the bottom are left with nothing. They are the vulnerable, the afflicted, the economically oppressed, the prisoner, the homeless, the mentally ill, and Lord have mercy on all of us, the masses of displaced people all over the world. The Hebrew word for the world's have-nots is Anoim. It means those who are bowed down. As I read this text, I imagine Jesus in this intimate moment with his closest friends as so very patient and tenderly compassionate. He seems to understand the terrible distress that is underneath their arguing, and so he does not berate them. He doesn't tell them what they should do. He does not, as he does in other places, throw up his hands in exasperation. Instead, imagine this if you can. The text says, Jesus sat down and called the 12 and said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. Can you hear the charity of his response to his frightened friends? He expresses no disappointment in them, no judgment. Instead, he just has another go at bringing them around to where he knows they need to be eventually. He explains once more that the kingdom which he has come to proclaim is the exact opposite of what the world offers, the exact opposite of what they have been arguing about. Then John, and presumably the others too, begin to show some real curiosity and engage Jesus in the kind of conversation that will help them find their way. The last thing Jesus says in answer to John's question is this: be at peace with one another. He could just as well have said, there's no point in arguing about who's the greatest. Surely by this time you understand that you are God's beloved and mine. Some of you, on Friday, this past Friday, the body of a 25-year-old woman who had been stabbed to death was found in the Hollywood Cemetery in North Memphis. She was known to a few of us here at Calvary because she had been to one of the Lives Worth Saving events we host here each month. I know almost nothing about her except that she came to Memphis from another state and had an arrest record for prostitution and drug charges. She had a child, and she almost certainly had been abused as a child herself. I don't know what she dreamed of becoming, or who she had loved, or how she made her life even harder than it needed to be. But I do know this. I know that in God's eyes, this woman, an Anoim if ever there was one, was just as worthy, just as lovable as anyone else on God's green earth. Some of you will remember the old Jean Knight song, Mr. Big Stuff. Who do you think you are, the song goes. You're never going to get my love. And there, it seems to me, is the crux of the matter. The universal and very sad tale of looking for love, acceptance, a place of belonging in ways that will not, that cannot bring us lasting peace. Jesus came to proclaim good news to the poor. I have come to know many of you so well, and I know that you are true disciples. I know that you are already walking in solidarity with the poor. You get it. And if you were anything like me, you get it and then you forget. And so you have to ask Jesus to explain things again and again. And that is why we need a community of faith, to help us remember how to be the disciples we long to be. My prayer is that God will strengthen our desire to be faithful, forgive us when we fail, and help us to grow in love day by day. Amen.
Amen.